Our story begins in one picturesque place, the port of Lit. A huge ship is approaching this port, and the pleasant sound of waves can be heard all around. When the ship arrived at the port, the seagulls that were sitting at the pier took off into the air, and finally those who were on the ship came to land, and some were very happy about it. The young guy joyfully raised his hands up and shouted that they had finally gotten here. He began to look around. He was interested in absolutely everything, and the first thing he noticed was a cute woman in a bunny costume who turned to the man and said that he could buy the potion only after he did her a favor. Also in the port there was immediately a market where fish and other sea creatures were sold. Voices were heard from everywhere in the port. People were busy with their own affairs. Some were looking for a warehouse where they could store their items. Others wanted to train and travel the world with other sailors. Someone was completely lost. A young and surprised guy who had just arrived at this port with sparkling eyes looked around and was happy. A dark-skinned, white-haired man came up to him and hugged this guy with one arm, asking if he was glad to be here, and called him by name. This guy's name was Raymond. This white-haired man was named Walker. Raymond turned to him and said that he had to admit that he was also delighted with this place. Other people also arrived here with them. A man in a green jacket and hat said that he wanted to tell everyone in this port how he felt. His name was Theron. Next to him was a cute girl with black hair. Theron wanted to tell everyone how he feels because their adventure begins here. This is the time when adventurers from all over the world write their own stories of epic journeys. It's the age of adventure. The gate is a mysterious portal that suddenly began to appear all over the world. These gates lead to worlds where terrible monsters unknown to anyone live. Countless adventurers have died within the gate, but the rewards certainly outweigh the risks. This forces ambitious people to continue to experience new worlds. A white-haired man with dark skin and blue eyes said that they needed bait. At the same time, he pointed his finger directly at Raymond, who stood in bewilderment. He also said that it is impossible to come up with a strategy before entering the gate, since it is unknown what to expect. Those who risked doing this in many seasons for this very reason took their lives in unforeseen circumstances, and now began to hire bait slaves. The girl who stood by the wall asked, "Are we talking about those who will distract the attention of the monsters while they run away from the battlefield?" She thought that it seemed to her that this was a good idea, and so they immediately went to where these slaves were. The man who traded them greeted the white-haired man and the other members of the team and said that he was glad to see them here. This place is owned and managed by the Gapwar Trading Guild, all who are slaves of bait, and he hopes that they have a suitable product for them. Then the seller laughed loudly and said that they would definitely buy their expenses. He could guarantee that, and if they allowed him, he could recommend 2 of you. He pointed his hand at the guys he was referring to and said that he had just received them, so they were relatively fresh. Walker said that he would buy 2 of them. The seller said that the buyer had impeccable and excellent taste. After some time, they went straight to the portal and were wished good luck on their journey. Walker said that the adventurers leave marks on the trunk that show how many teams entered this particular gate, but there is not a single one in front of this gate. Then Walker said what it means they will be first, and drew a symbol there. Then, with a smile and some excitement in his eyes, he looked at his comrades and asked if they were ready. Everyone was also positive, and said that they were ready to move forward. Immediately after that, they crossed the threshold of that portal and found themselves in another space. Raymond immediately entered and felt that there was a very strange feeling here. Looking around, he was very surprised. This world was incredibly interesting. It is located in a real forest of huge mushrooms that also glow. He said that he had never been to such a bizarre place before. Inside, brother, the atmosphere was not at all what he imagined. Walker told the slaves that they need to go forward. Don't panic, the portal usually opens far from the monster's lair, so they are safe for now. But it is impossible to exit along the same path they came in. Their priority is to determine the location in Rad with the exit. Suddenly, the girl who was on this team felt someone's gaze on her. As she looked, she noticed behind her a huge creature that was already sticking its claws into her. A moment later, this creature simply destroyed the poor girl who did not even expect such a quick end to her life. Everyone was alarmed. The slaves asked why there were monsters here. The girl's name was Charlotte, and she had just been eaten by a huge monster. Having looked around, the guys noticed that this monster is not alone here. There are a whole horde of them here. Walker grabbed his bow, which he had once bought from a mage, and aimed at the monsters with fiery arrows. He fired one fiery arrow and pierced right through the huge creature that attacked Charlotte. Walker understood that something was wrong here, and ordered the bait to be tied to a tree. "We need to run away from here." The slaves begged those guys to wait and take them with them, but they did not listen to the slaves. The man in the green hat shouted for the slave to shut his mouth and stand still. Raymond tied the slaves' chains to a tree. He felt very sorry for these guys. As soon as they did this, they immediately began to run away, the slaves begging them not to leave them. But that's exactly why they were taken here. They were bait. The ferocious creatures first attacked those poor fellows who were tied to the tree. Walker grabbed the wounded Charlotte's body and ran away with her, carrying her on his back. He shouted that the task was being postponed. Now is not the time to hunt monsters. We need to find a way out, and quickly. Raymond was shocked by everything that was happening here. He did not expect that everything would not be as fun as he thought. He stopped and was breathing heavily. The man in the green hat grabbed him and shouted for the fool to come to his senses. They need to listen to Walker's instructions. They need to calm down. Their adventure was a complete failure this time. But they can prepare better to try again. It's too early to give up. They can't let their guard down. While he was saying that together they would survive, another huge creature appeared behind him, which was very fast. This huge feathered creature very quickly hit the man in the green hat with its huge paw and simply crushed him on the spot. Walker was beside himself with rage and pity. Tears flowed from his eyes because he was very sorry that Theron also died. When you huge creature raised your clawed and huge paw, everyone saw that Theron could no longer be saved. Raymond fell to the ground and froze in horror looking at the dead body of his comrade. Walker again grabbed his staff, which he used as a bow, and aimed at the ferocious creature. Well, this creature was too fast. In an instant this terrible beast stuck out its long tongue. With this tongue, he grabbed Walker's neck and squeezed him hard. Then this huge creature began to drag him straight into its terrible mouth full of sword-sharp teeth. The last thing that man shouted was words for help, but no one saved him. Raymond had never experienced such a shock in his life. All his friends were destroyed before his eyes. The young guy noticed that the creature was approaching him and, in horror, began to crawl in the other direction. He didn't know what to do. The horror numbed him so much that he simply couldn't help himself. The creature grabbed his leg with its sticky and long tongue and its teeth into it. The guy screamed very loudly, but someone was watching him all this time. Suddenly he looked up the mountain and noticed they're the same slave whom he had tied to a tree. He was very surprised that the bait survived, and it would seem that this man is now his hope. Raymond shouted that thank God he survived. What a relief! And then he began to beg that the guy on the tree with the spear would help him quickly. Everyone died. Only he and this slave remained. All this time while he quickly said the monster devoured his leg, Raymond asked for forgiveness for what happened, and he was generally against it. He also said that he couldn't get out of here alone. He needed to work together. While Raymond felt incredible pain because he was being devoured by a monster, he just looked at that poor fellow and did nothing. Raymond loudly shouted at him to stop standing there with his hands folded, and called that slave a piece of shit. But the slave only smiled at these words. He jumped from the tree. Then he came closer to the guy and said that no matter how much he wanted to save him, but it seems it's too late. After all, the monster has already devoured half of that poor guy's body. Raymond looked down and saw his reflection in the pool of blood. Realizing that he was about to die, he began to lose his mind and shouted that he was a very stupid slave. Does he really believe that he can survive alone? His turn will come to him. And immediately after these words, the monster made another jerk and simply shredded Raymond, killing him completely. But this huge creature was not enough of this food. He also wanted to feast on the slave. A huge but fast creature prepared to jump. Then it rushed straight towards the guy who was standing with a spear in his hand. But the guy with black hair was absolutely calm. He said that he thought that he could survive. He pointed his spear straight at that huge beast and went through it, making a huge hole in the beast. A feathered creature with horns just dropped dead not far from this guy. Having stained his face and clothes with blood, he straightened his hair and said that this was not the place where he died. And now let's move to a completely different place. But this place was no less sinister. Several armed men stood on the edge of the cliff. At the very edge stood a man in a black cloak. Creatures that looked very much like flying lizards were approaching them. There were also huge creatures that looked like demons from the underworld. They were of all sizes, from small to incredibly huge. Among them, one huge dragon especially stood out. It was the Horntail, also known as the King of Dragons. One of those guys said that it turns out that the Centauri nest was also destroyed. They have no one else to rely on here, starting with the Knights of Cygnus, the resistance of the Crusade hunters and adventurers, and ending with the 6 heroes on whom people pinned their hopes. A woman approached this man who was standing on the edge of the cliff and said that everyone was dead. She looked at his back and said that he was the only one left. This was the last adventurer. His name was Elpham. And finally he said that they would now go forward, because the last adventure awaited them. The incredibly huge dragon had already noticed its prey and was flying straight towards those people. He opened his huge mouth wide and growled so that the earth began to cower. Then there was a battle in which there were huge losses. Elpham was on his knees, covered in blood and breathing heavily. Around him were the dead bodies of his assistants who could not survive this battle. And right in front of this guy lay the huge head of a ferocious dragon in which there was no longer any life. Elpham raised his eyes to the mountain asking just one question: is this the end? As it turned out, it was a 3-headed dragon, and our hero managed to cut off one head. They survived the heavy blow but managed to cut off one head, only to see it regenerate. He thought that all their efforts were in vain, and the huge creature again headed straight towards him. Elpham realized that this was definitely the end. He simply closed his eyes, resigning himself to what was about to happen. He thought that this was the end of his world, and also the end of the adventure. But getting angry, he hit the ground very hard with his fist. A rather large dent formed at the site of the impact. The guy said that it was some kind of curse. He was incredibly golden. He still did not want to come to terms with the fact that everything could end like this. After all, what then was the sacrifice of all those who were next to him? Philip, Jaden, and Eleceed, they all gave their lives, resigned to the fact that this was their last battle. Elpham raised his head up the mountain and shouted loudly that he refused to accept it. He looked with incredible anger at the huge dragon, which was growing another head. He turned to the horntail and said that he would not die just like that. The guy with black hair used his power and concentrated it in his hand. He then swung, creating a huge arrow to launch at his enemy. He shouted that he would kill this dragon even if it was the last thing he could do. Well, the amount of enormous radiated energy that he used did not remain without a trace. He suffered an internal hemorrhage and blood began pouring out of his mouth. The dragon, using one of its heads which was in the middle, wanted to incinerate its opponent. He began to spew out a huge amount of ancient magic which he aimed at Elpham. Our hero saw in front of him a huge ball that was supposed to smear him into powder. What a pitiful sight. Why should the end be exactly like this? And if only it had more power. If he could start all over again. He tried to change something. With these thoughts, he died in that world, but suddenly he heard someone shouting at him to get up, then splashed water on him. After looking around, the guy realized that he was in a completely different place. There were shackles on his hands. The man who was throwing a bucket of water at him said that he knows that this brat is healthy. He is just a bait slave, and you shouldn't forget your place. Elpham didn't understand what happened at all. Where did the horntail go? He didn't understand why he was even alive. Looking around, he heard talk that they had brought a new product. This is an excellent choice for a long trip to the dungeon. Elpham tried to move his hands. Well, I realized that these shackles would not be so easy to remove. He was in a cage and they looked at him like some kind of animal. Are these people really choosing slaves for themselves? Is this really a place where they sell people? Elpham tried to realize what was going on here. It seemed to him that all this was some kind of nonsense. He thought that such markets had already been banned a long time ago. But he was completely sure that this was such a market. He began to analyze the situation. If he understood everything correctly, then this man with a nose piercing was probably a merchant. And he bought it at the market 6 years ago, when he was already a slave. This is definitely him. Then he actually went back in time. The merchant got angry because this guy was looking at him for so long. Because of this, he entered the cage and asked him what the hell he was staring at, then hit him on the head very hard. He realized that this was precisely the moment when it all began. Or perhaps he was dreaming all this. But he had too real sensations to be just a fantasy. And then the same group of people who ultimately bought him from this market approached him. The guy thought that this didn't make sense, but he didn't see any other explanation. The seller said that he received these slaves not so long ago, and they were relatively fresh, then they were bought. Elpham about the fact that it looks like he was given a chance. It looks like he needs to fix everything this time. Now let's return to the very place where our hero killed that huge monster with a spear. He walked around the area and found the fire arrow staff. It was a good ability, and this thing will suit him perfectly now. He threw it over his shoulder. But this is still not enough. The adventure group probably took other things with them. They still planned to collect more goods here. He also remembered that some people hide valuables in their shoes, and he found a ring in one of his shoes which he put on his finger. Elpham looked at the ring and it began to shine. He realized that it was a telekinesis ring. Suddenly he heard a noise coming from the bushes, and when he had seen enough, he noticed other ferocious creatures. He understood that they must have come to the smell of blood. They would have to fight. They quickly ran towards him to tear him to pieces, but the guy was ready. He began to repel their attacks and chop these creatures into pieces like a meat grinder. When the huge creatures began to use their long sticky tongues during the battle, this worsened the situation. One of those animals grabbed the spear that was in the hands of our hero, and this spear was successfully torn into pieces which scattered in different directions. Elpham was even surprised by the power of such a creature. He realized that it would be difficult for him to defeat them all, and behind him there was another creature that was already trying to bite off his head. Elpham grabbed the weapon he found and used a fire arrow. He managed to save his life by killing the monster that almost bit off his head, but others also attacked him. Now is a good time to try out the ring he found. With the help of this ring, he was able to control the arrow and direct it at his opponents. Thus, he was able to quickly pierce several creatures at once with one movement of his hand. But this arrow could not maintain its strength for a long time. It simply dried up. Elpham understood that if he was not held back for a long time, the creatures would continue to try to tear him apart. He wanted to activate the fire arrow again, but for some reason this time it didn't work out for him. Therefore, he struck that creature first with his staff and then finished it off with his foot. The staff is not broken. It seems to have a cooldown time. Then he decided to attack these creatures with his staff until it recharged. There was no choice. Elpham himself looked like a beast in this battle, and those guys who attacked him were no longer happy about such a meeting. And after some time of this battle, he felt that the staff was charging. He lifted it up the mountain and was ready to attack his opponent. The creatures began to approach him again. They wanted to finally end this. Elpham fired a fiery arrow and again used the power of that same ring to destroy the remaining creatures. This time he accelerated to destroy as many of these creatures as quickly as possible at once. The power of the staff ran out again, and he again could not release these arrows for some time. But he no longer needed this. He simply stood surrounded by the dead bodies of those creatures. Suddenly he heard someone's voice address him. It was the same girl who was wounded by the beast. She said that this was an unusual bait slave. Elpham was surprised that she was still alive. She said through the pain that this combat ability and magic are incomparable to anything. Who the hell is he? Elpham thought that this was a very lucky girl, although he should take back his words. The girl who was seriously injured asked why he had this staff. And also he had rings around his wrist. How could the decoy slave awaken such powers? The girl asked in a trembling voice. Was it really because of him that the anomaly happened? Elpham looked at her, thinking about what he should do. Now the fate of this girl is in his hands. A stronger wind began. Our hero asked if she had finished what she wanted. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about, but our hero said that he was afraid that she was mistaken. It didn't even matter if the others remained alive, because he was going to kill her anyway. After all, she used people as bait to survive. Elpham said in a menacing voice that he despises people like her. When it was all over and our hero managed to find a way out, he went back to the city. The guys who noticed him were very surprised. Is this really true? They did not believe that the decoy slave returned alive from there alone. Elpham thought that the die had been cast. He needed to act quickly so that this would not be his fate. But everything should be done in order. He came to one large building in the city. Holding a staff in his hand, he wanted to get rid of the status of a slave. When he entered that building, they asked him to wait. They were trying to clarify the situation. The man who sat at the table and lit a cigar and said, "Did this rat come back alive?" His assistant said that everything was true. This is always the case, and the man said that according to this man, he came unharmed. Then his interlocutor named Mr. Abbey said, "What's wrong with this? Is this the first time that the decoy slave returned without injury?" Then the man always said that all the adventurers from the team he was in died at the gate. Then the man with a cigar asked that he really wanted to say that this slave survived alone. This is really strange. And also strange that he decided to provide a report about not escaping. Those who have become slaves due to huge debts cannot avoid the fate of being used as bait again. Since he didn't try to escape, it means he realizes how difficult it is to hide from them. In the end, death is the only path to freedom for them. Always, and the man said that business was being carried out in their trading guild Gapor. Is it really necessary to report to him on such trifles? But the assistant said that the gentleman should know something else. He also learned that this slave awakened the first circle. The man with the cigar was very surprised. He didn't understand. Did this decoy slave awaken the first circle? The man with the cigar was thinking that he probably had a bad opinion of their guild since he was a slave. The assistant also said that he was told that that slave was asking to change his contract. The slave wants to register as an adventurer. The man with the eye patch was very surprised. Who the hell does he think he is? The assistant said that Mr. Larkin wanted Abby's to deal with this situation personally. Then Abby's jumped to his feet and asked, did Mr. Larkin himself say this? He wondered why the executive head of the guild would be interested in a stinking slave. Looking at the stack of papers, he thought a little more and came to a conclusion. The assistant left his office and closed the door behind him. The man with the eye patch thought aloud that the decoy slave yearned to become an adventurer. In the name of Emperor Cygnus, slavery was abolished, but only conditionally. People have always been slaves of money. They have always thirsted for gold and were ready to do anything for it. Those who could not pay on time were obliged to work off the gold. This simple law led to non-caste slaves in the world of Maple. When our hero's father, the only family he had, died of illness, he became one of them. Elpham purchased an ingredient called black moss from the Gapor Trade Guild to cure his father, promising to pay later. The guild demanded 1,000,000 gold coins, which was several times the market price. The defendant failed to pay the merchant guild 1,000,000 coins on time, and therefore will have to perform work for the guild within a set time. For 6 years these scumbags exploited him day after day, and also mocked him. Elpham thought that it was time for him to take revenge for this. Elpham sat opposite Abby's and said that he was at his service. He realized who he was sitting in front of now and thought that he was a faithful servant of one of the executive heads of the guild. Not bad at all. The man with the eye patch said that he heard that Elpham wanted to change the contract. Therefore, he wanted to get straight to the point since he had already been told enough about this slave. The bearded man then said that he would register him as an F-rank adventurer. Elpham reflected that he agreed to his application quite easily and thanked his interlocutor. However, our hero wanted to clarify something. He demanded the E rank. He understood in advance that the game would go exactly according to his rules and not according to the rules of these scumbags. Then his interlocutor asked why he needed rank E. Even the Association of Adventurers did not officially recognize him. Elpham replied that he had come to the gate as a bait slave hundreds of times over the past 3 years. His interlocutor replied that everything was correct. He came there as bait, but he was still new to killing monsters. Our hero asked, since when are adventurers judged by their ability to hunt monsters? The first seeker earned great glory through his survival skills, the main goal of any adventurer to return alive and after the processions. The man with the eye patch thought that this was really true, the information that the survivor would bring at the cost of military merit. He said that this was reasonable. Then he said that, to be honest, the fact that this slave survived and came back a bunch of times being bait is a great achievement. But that's all. Bait's only taken to the gates of the lower level. Does he really believe that his insignificant survival skills will save his ass in the gates of the high level? He began to take out a cigar and said that this guy is very mistaken if he mistakes their guild for credence who will sign a contract with a self-confident idiot. This man closed his cigarette and said, looked at the guy, thinking that if he continues to overestimate himself, he will die very soon. However, his intuition told him something about this guy. By this he said that there is a gate with a limit of 5 people and 12 marks on the tree trunk. Then he smiled and said that everything is correct. This means that at least 12 groups of 5 people went there and did not return. The bearded man turned to the slave and told him to prove to him that he was worthy of the rank he was asking for. If Elpham succeeds, he will correct his wish, and at the same time he handed him a piece of paper. Elm of Time, he immediately found guys to join. Those guys turned to him and said that he must be the same newcomer who joined them. One of them, a blonde man with green eyes, said that he was glad to meet you. His name is Chev, and he is the tank of their team. And Mr. Abbeys also told him that he was a Bates slave. But there is no need to worry about this, because he doesn't care about it, just like his comrades. Elpham said that he was glad to meet them, and his interlocutor also said that he had also heard that he could use fire magic. Elpham replied that everything was correct. Then a dark-skinned man with white hair asked whether any magic is inaccessible with a poppy seed. Chev said that this is not true. They can only control the element to which they are predisposed from birth, which is why it is useless for them to take an object that does not match their element. But he moved away from the topic and said that it's possible that our hero already knows their goal on this mission is hunting monsters. They need to return the items that were dropped by the other 12 teams that went here before them. When they collect all those things, their work will be over. The guild is ready to pay 3,000 coins for each item. The dark-skinned man said that this was a robbery in broad daylight. They would have been left without any items at all if it weren't for them. Besides, those guys had 1 circle each, which means their items cost at least 7,000. The man with the scar on his face told him that he should stop complaining. Then the man with white hair said that he did not complain. Then the head of this team told them all to calm down, and it was time to earn some money. Immediately they entered that portal and found themselves in a completely different world. It was very light here, but still somehow creepy. The commander said that everyone should listen to him. It is very likely that the task will be delayed. Judging by the terrain, it is necessary to set up a camp. One said that they should set up camp at the top of a tree. There are many branches and they can hide behind them, and from above it will be more convenient to look for better places. And they agreed with this proposal and immediately began to do just that. A blonde man with dark skin approached our hero, put his hand on his shoulder, then said that he could rest, because he and this pizza behind were experts in construction. And after some time, they built a truly good shelter. Now that everything was ready, they had to split into 2 groups and explore the area. The commander said that Tom, Max and Roa would all go together. The commander and Elpham will check the western side, and the other group will check the eastern side. If something happens, let them immediately give a signal and quickly return to base. Then everyone understood what they needed to do. They agreed with this and hit the road. The green-eyed man looked around and thought that there were almost no monsters here. He said that they probably set up camp too close to the entrance. Tomorrow they will go deeper into the forest. He then asked our hero how was his first assignment as an adventurer. Elpham, with an absolutely calm face, said that he was nervous. Then his interlocutor smiled and said that he understood him. Chev said that he still sometimes worries every time he enters the gate, even though he has gained a little experience. But he is not the bravest man in the world. But he continues to boldly take a step forward because he is surrounded by people who are important to him. He doesn't know how it sounds from the outside, but all his comrades are really good. He really felt very sorry when he first heard the story of Elpham. But it's even hard to imagine how hard it was for him. Chev walked ahead of our hero and then stopped and said that if he wanted, he could always join them. When he looked at Elpham, he noticed that he was standing near some small hole that someone had recently dug. Chev laughed and said that we shouldn't take his words too seriously. After some time, night came and they sat down under a tree to make a fire, but they failed to find anything. The head of this team said that maybe they should avoid talking about work, at least over a meal. Elpham still had not freed himself from the shackles on his neck. He still walked with him, and that evening he drank only water. When everyone had a snack, they went to bed to gain strength. But not everyone went to bed. Some kind of creaking was heard. Someone was approaching our hero. This was the head. He approached the place where our hero did not fully address him. He asked if he was sleeping. Behind him there were still his other companions. Elpham did not make a sound, and it seemed that he was sleeping very soundly. The same white-haired man with black skin approached him and said that why was the commander asking these questions. He held a large knife in his hand and said that you don't know that Elpham was too fast asleep to answer. He told the commander that he was too careful. Did he really forget that they gave him dinner? This thing is powerful enough to give way to the giant mush mom. He literally ate everything clean. He was lucky that he remained alive. For his staff of fire arrows they can get at least 10,000 gold coins. Then this man with white hair swung his knife to kill our hero, and immediately he plunged his blade straight into Elpham's body. He felt that something was clearly wrong here. What was the matter? When he put away the sleeping bag, he noticed that there was just a piece of wood and 2 pillows. And he wasn't there. They were all very surprised. How could this be? The commander shouted for them to find this freak. He must be somewhere nearby. As soon as he said this, a loud explosion immediately sounded, knocking everyone off their feet. Our hero watched all this from another tree. He watched as those guys who wanted to kill him were now in danger. They quickly began to rise on their feet, not understanding what the hell. The commander said that they needed to quickly save food and other valuable things. Did Elpham really do this? A man with black hair who froze in place turned to the commander and pointed his finger somewhere to the side. When the commander looked at who saw the huge eye of a creepy creature in front of him, he was confused at this moment. He said that this Elpham is a scumbag. A huge, strange, and sticky creature was approaching them to devour them. They screamed that this fool was using them as bait to lure out the monster. They jumped off that tree and started falling down because they saw that monster coming. A huge, slippery monster with a quick movement in its mouth simply tore apart their cover. Elpham, watching what was happening, thought that the actor from Chev was terrible. He shouldn't have shown kindness if he wanted to deceive him. This gate finished off 12 teams. They welcomed the former decoy and not the one with the most experience with open arms. How obvious it is. Our hero correctly guessed that this monster is the boss of the dungeon. The guys jumped to the ground and began to quickly run away. The commander shouted that this was the worst type of monster for them. His assistant with black hair turned to his boss and asked what he knew about this monster. Chev said that if he was not mistaken, then it was a golden slime mold. His body is made of acid, making him the worst enemy for them fighting in close combat. And that's not all. Chev noticed that something dangerous was flying right towards the meeting. He threw his comrade aside, shouting to be careful here. They fell to the ground. The man with black hair was shocked by this. As it turned out, he can attack from a distance, acid arrow, an ability that shoots acid. Then the man with black hair screamed in panic that it was so unfair. Chev shouted for everyone to start panicking. He was advancing again. Right while they were running away, they were thinking about what they should do in this situation and how they could defeat him. The head said that first they need to get out of the attack radius. They had acid arrows reload time 1 minute. You need to get into a combat formation and destroy the core located in the center of his head. A man with white hair and black skin said that it was good that he had recharge. Then Max rushed forward before the time ran out. He said what should they wait for? He decided to finish him off right now and rushed alone over his huge monster. The commander shouted that he should wait. We all need to act together. And so he didn't even have time to get to that monster when it was immediately torn apart by its 2 parts. The commander was shocked by what he saw, but he had a reload time. He still had about 10 seconds. And then that monster started attacking them with his acid arrows one by one. And in an instant he simply killed all those guys who came under this blow. Elpham stood behind the tree and watched all this. He realized that those guys were finished. He thought that in theory Chev was right, but the golden slime mold became stronger with each item it absorbed. It is quite expected that the recharge time could be reduced. Unpredictable growth and the ability to fire acid arrows of recharge. It seems Elpham understood why the previous teams died. This monster is not from their league. In this state, he will be able to hold out in these yellow gates, which are 2 levels lower than the red ones, and he doubts that adventurers with 1 circle will be able to defeat him. No objects could be returned from this gate. He realized that the task was over, and then he remembered that man with a cigar who wanted the guy to prove it to him. Elpham figured out what he would do. While that slime mold looked around, our hero acted. Then the monster heard some noise and began to carefully look for the source of this noise. But he didn't have time to react, and a huge exchange arrow hit him directly. The slime mold was injured, its body parts dripping onto the ground and burning through it. He was in great pain and growled in pain. Elpham was aiming for the core, but this monster has impressive magic resistance. It will take at least 4 more shots or even 5 to defeat him. Elpham grabbed the knife and thought that this shouldn't be a problem, but he doesn't mind getting evidence that he destroyed this monster. The angry slime mold began to attack our hero with its acid arrows. Naturally, our hero dodged such an attack and jumped to the ground. Slizeric continued to attack with all his powers. He was furious and in pain. Elpham fell to the ground and right in flight he dodged those attacks of that creature. He already had a plan in mind. He grabbed the rope and used the power of his ring. Each shot must land in the same place, something a simple magician can only dream of. Well, our hero is not simple. In a past life he was known as the greatest telekineticist. With sharp and skillful movements and a knife that he tied to this rope, he then, with the help of the ring, began to evade the attacks of this creature. And after a moment he took aim with his bow and released a fiery arrow. He hit this creature again and the terrible beast roared loudly and then began to continue shooting acid arrows at his opponent. Elpham dodged very quickly and waited for his fire weapon to reload. And after some time he again used the fiery arrow. And again he hit his opponent. This was already the 3rd arrow. The terrible creature made of acid slowly decreased in size. But at the same time, she was not going to give up. This creature constantly attacked our hero. Elpham waited again to reload. All this time he dodged the attacks and finally fired another fire arrow. But this time that creature managed to dodge the fiery arrow. Elpham thought that this creature was quite agile for its size, but it was no use. He used the power of his levitation ring and redirected the arrow back at the creature. And finally, he saw the very core that he needed. As soon as he saw this cannonball, he immediately rushed straight to meet the enemy. His staff caught fire, and our hero said out loud that this was the end. He was already very close to the core, but the terrible creature tried to heal the wound in order to hide the core. At some point, our hero realized that he would not have time to grab the core, and moreover, this creature would now grab him with its huge paw. Therefore, he again used the levitating ring to evade. He threw away the blade that was tied to the rope and controlled it to move in the air. Thus, he quickly changed his trajectory and the creature could not attack him. Elpam was the main thing and quickly landed on the ground. He was already ready to use the properties. And again he shot a fiery arrow. The creature understood that he could not escape. Elpam smiled when he saw that this creature covered himself with his hand. He quickly used his limiting ring to change the trajectory of the arrow and aimed straight for the head. And again there was an explosion. A huge creature received crushing damage. The core of this creature was no longer protected and could be easily destroyed, but it was precisely that decisive arrow that put an end to the existence of this creature. The creature swelled greatly in size and roared loudly, and then it just exploded like a balloon that had been pumped up too much air. Elpam began to quickly run away from that acidic mucus so as not to harm himself. Faster and faster he moved like a bird using a levitating ring. Then he released the blade further to catch on a tree, and so he jumped out onto a tree just at the moment when the whole earth beneath him was flooded with acid. Elpam looked absolutely calmly at what happened. He understood that he had already defeated this creature. The acid was spilling for many meters around. It was dangerous to step on the ground now. Very quickly this acid scorched every living thing it touched. When the acid was a little absorbed into the ground, Elpam descended to the ground to explore the area. He needed just one thing. He looked around and finally found what he needed. In order not to go far, he simply pulled this little thing to himself with the help of his ring. It was this very core that he managed to extract from this monster. He carefully took it into his hand, making sure that this core was no longer in the acid. It shone here in his hand with a red light. Elpam knew what to do with it. This thing can take him to a new level of power. A mysterious sphere flew into the air and then enveloped our hero in a red glow. And finally, after some time, Elpam returned to the man whom he promised that he would return from there. A man with a cigar sat opposite our hero and looked at him silently. He was surprised that this guy was actually able to return, and said that this means that he not only knows how to talk, but he returned again alone, and without the items he had agreed to return. Elpam replied that the team to which he was introduced consisted of absolute beginners. They tried to kill him to take his item. It seems they met a boss monster, and died while running away from it. A man with an eye patch asked his interlocutor if he had seen that monster. Elpam replied that he saw what kind of creature it was. It was a golden slime mold. Now the man with a cigar in his mouth realized that all the objects that were left over from the previous guys were corroded by acid. Then that man with the cigar thought that he couldn't believe that I had lost my children. All the items that I had put aside for those people were a huge loss. And the fact that this guy also returned is another problem. Several universal rules apply to all brothers. Firstly, each gate has its own limit on the number of people entering. It is indicated on the trunk in front of the entrance. When the limit is reached, the gate is deactivated until all those entering die. Secondly, there is a restriction on which adventurers can enter the gate of a certain color. The difficulty of the gate varies from red to purple. If the adventurer's rank exceeds the allowed tone, they will not be able to enter the gate. Thirdly, the adventurer is given only one chance to clear the gates. This is the main difficulty associated with their capture. As soon as someone comes out alive, they immediately disappear, and no one else can enter there. And another opportunity is given only when all team members died at the gate. And now let's return to our hero. The man who sat in front of him was thinking about the fact that the gates and rewards had disappeared. To be honest, the golden slime mold is too powerful a monster for adventurers with one circle. Then, after these thoughts, he turned to the Alps and said that it is now clear to him. That is, he barely managed to get out of there. This explains why he did not return a single item. But all eyewitnesses were destroyed. The man with the eye patch said that whatever the reason, Elpam couldn't cope. Elpam answered him that there was no need to rush to a conclusion, because he had not finished speaking yet. Our hero unfastened his leather bracers and wanted to show his interlocutor something. And finally, when he showed him what he wanted, this green-eyed man simply couldn't believe his eyes. As it turned out, Elpam absorbed the golden slime mold, which meant that he killed him. The bearded man shouted that these two circles, had he really absorbed the mana stone that fell out of him? Elpam replied that he thinks this is a great proof of his abilities, and now he wants his interlocutor to register him as an E-rank adventurer. A bearded man with an eye patch said that he would give him D rank. Elpam now asked what he meant. The man jumped up on the table and said that he would register Elpam under rank D, and if he agreed to work exclusively for him, he would become rank C. Elpam, don't think for long. I started signing the contract that man gave him. The man with the cigar was thinking that rank C for adventurers without a third circle was prohibitively high. The rank of adventurers is strongly tied to the number of circles. In this world, the corresponding number of circles of power varies greatly. However, this guy is clearly an exception. Not everyone can get a circle by consuming a mana stone. Plus, he has an instinct for self-preservation. This guy is just a diamond. He is significantly superior to those people who came here. He earned the second circle in the blink of an eye immediately after the first. He has an unheard of speed of development. The man with the cigar smiled and thought about hiring him. Meanwhile, Elpam was thinking that everything was going better than he expected. This man clearly needed him. He himself understood that it would be useful very soon. He knew what would happen next. The first conquest of the Red Gate for 100 people will take place soon. If his memory serves him right, then around this time there will be a huge event in which all the trade and adventure guilds in Lith will be interested. Gapor will also probably turn his attention to it. This is not bad at all, because he is also in a hurry, and it would not hurt him to speed up the execution of his plan a little. Elpham turned to Mr. Abbeys and said that he wanted to ask him for a favor. Elpham was now broke, that is, he had nothing at all. He extended his hand and said that he wanted to put money aside from his interlocutor. Abbeys smiled when he heard this, but he did it somehow faintly. He himself was thinking about this. Did this brat really ask him for money? While some argue that the appearance of the brother gave birth to an era of adventure, in fact they are a trap set by a dark magician. Many adventurers died in the gates, slowly but surely robbing the world of Maple of its potential. And then the day of the apocalypse came. A huge number of monsters, as if waiting for this moment, got out of the gate, and they were defeated. The described event will happen exactly 3 years later. The tragic fate of Maple, who is destined to collide with her, is just around the corner. After the conversation, Elpham left his interlocutor's office and moved on. He walked and Abbeys watched him from the window, about to light another cigarette. Elpham understood that he had a long way to go, but he thought that this would be enough to start implementing his plans. The recently found gate for 100 people is red, which means that only those with 2 circles or less can enter there. The Gap or Trade Guild usually hires high-ranking adventurers. The only reason to invest in it is that they are targeting this gate. Our hero finally has money, but he needs to manage it wisely. You shouldn't spend it all at once. Truly useful items are too expensive. Then what is the best thing to spend your saved money on? Elpham went to the place where people were sold. It was a market. He understood that this place was simply terrible. People were being trafficked here. A man immediately approached him with a smile and greeted our hero, then said that he was glad to welcome him to the labor market. He also said that the man he was talking to looked like he was looking for adventure, and wanted to help him. Elpham looked around and noticed how people were bargaining among themselves for other people. They had separate bait slaves or partners who would fight with them side by side. Elpham said that he was looking for a certain person and wanted to be taken to him. A man in a red headband asked who exactly should he be taken to. And so we see that our hero immediately went to the dungeon where the punitive premises were located. He sends the most problematic people there for correctional purposes, and the one our hero is looking for is one of them. After walking around this gloomy place for a short time, they finally arrived at their destination. They came to one of the cells and there was a muscular man tied up in chains. The seller asked if the gentleman was sure that he was looking for this particular person. Elpham looked at this big guy and told him that he was looking for him. The death of one person hastened the destruction of Maple's world in our hero's past life. Erin, this is the heroine of the halberd. This mighty woman was killed, and the criminal turned out to be none other than her only student. It was a murder hero named Dubois. This incident marked the beginning of the end. A muscular man in shackles turned to our hero and asked was he really looking for him? And then he said that they had never seen each other before and that he should get out of here. The seller turned to our hero and said that she was asking for his forgiveness, but this ignoramus should get some manners. He will earn a position with Slava. After a few years, while he is in slavery, he still dares to seek adventures that may become his master. The term impudent does not fully reflect his character. The seller said that this is just a savage and even an arrogant barbarian. Elpham smiled when he heard the words of this man, thinking that it was not for nothing that they called him that. After all, he was the most influential person after our hero when the apocalypse happened. People often compared them because they are both from the same region and have a lot in common, from when they awakened their powers to how strong they became. But there is one main similarity that we will learn about a little later. Elpham asked what is the price of this man. The freed man with scars said angrily that it looks like this fool is from a rich family. Is he really sure that he can afford to buy him? After all, it costs 1 million gold. Too expensive for this filthy bastard? Elpham reflected that they both desperately needed money at one time or another. His little sister is suffering from the black blood plague which is slowly killing her. A casual man in shackles said that if his buyer has no money, let him get lost. Elpham opened the bag which contained a lot of money. In one package he had 1 million local currency. Everyone was very surprised. The seller asked if you were confident, sir, in your decision. The man in shackles didn't understand whether this was a real person, and whether it was possible. The angry man then closed his mouth and began to worry. Elpham said that he was too early to admire. He had not finished yet, and demanded a contract for a year, a division of profits 7-3, and the transfer of all items obtained from the gates to Elpham. The merchant was very surprised when he realized that this man was trying to hire that prisoner as a crew member, and not a slave. Our hero wrote everything down on paper and then handed this contract to the slave and told him to read it carefully. The surprised man in shackles quickly snatched this piece of paper from his hands and told him not to take back his words. He quickly bit his finger with his teeth and didn't even think about this decision. He quickly put a signet with his blood. It looks like he is in a hurry to take care of his little sister. Elpham smiled. That's exactly what he needed. Without further ado, Elpham turned to his new team member and said that the contract had been signed, so they would immediately go to the gate. His interlocutor replied that he had been waiting for this and was ready to go right now. Elpham turned to him and said that he would have to prove his worth. And he called him by the name of Dubois. The US man did not say that he was the most dexterous person his interlocutor had ever met. And so they went on their adventure, each of them pursuing his own goal. They walked through a dense forest, and Dubois decided to hold a huge axe in his hand. He turned to our hero and calling her boss and said that he likes the new weapon, but with a long sword he feels more confident in himself. Shouldn't he have mastered something in which he has more experience? Elpham said that while he works for him, he will only use a halberd. But if he is against it, then they can terminate the contract. They came to this gate, and Dubois asked if they would train at this gate. Elpham approached the red gate with one mark with a limit of 8 people. This particular gate would suit them. Dubois asked what about the other team members? Because if it costs 1 million to buy him, then he is sure that he has enough money to hire others. Then he asked if there would be a healer with them, because there are many healers. But our hero was simply silent. Dubois tensed at that moment. He thought, could it be just the two of them there? Elpham answered him that he did not need to worry. They had enough people on the team to clear these gates. Dubois he breathed a sigh of relief and said that the boss scared him. Elpham pointed his finger at Dubois and said that the two of them would be enough. Dubois froze for a few seconds in surprise. He hoped that the boss was just joking. His heart began to beat faster. He asked, is this a joke? Elpham didn't want these long conversations and he simply kicked his accomplice and told him to stop wasting his time and finally go forward. Dubois, out of surprise, did not have time to react and began to fall into that portal. Finally, they found themselves in a completely new world, surrounded by the dry desert and stones. Dubois landed headfirst and our hero followed him. Dubois shouted in rage, has Elpham really lost his mind? What can the two of them do in a gate designed for 8? Where is his serious approach to business? First he decided to take his weapon, which he was not used to. Suddenly there was a noise behind Dubois and dust flew into the air. A whole crowd of living stumps began to move right towards them. Dubois realized that it sounded like his cry and brought these. They are known for their resistance to weapons like blades, but there are a whole lot of them here. Elpham pushed his assistant away and told him to step aside. He was heading straight towards these stumps. Dubois didn't understand what he was doing. Elpham used a fire arrow and immediately began to smash these creatures to pieces. These stumps were created by sorcerers. They were once ordinary trees, but now everything has changed. Elpham used the levitation ring again and began to exterminate a whole horde of these stumps. Dubois just looked in shock at everything that was happening. When our hero destroyed the creature that was attacking them, he turned to his interlocutor. He told him that it was very sad that he started screaming as soon as he entered the gate. Let him not make such a mistake again, because he simply attracts monsters. Dubois didn't understand who the hell this man was. But let's move to a slightly different place. The woman, on her knees, turned to her boss and said that the trade guild had taken the bait. They were thinking over the implementation schedule, and among them were their own people. I listened attentively to a man who stood at the window and held a glass of wine in his hand. She turned to him and asked if he would allow him to proceed with the plan. This man also had red eyes, looked at the girl and said that he allowed it. Then the woman bowed her head before him and began to disappear like a shadow. This man with long gray hair raised a glass of wine to the mountain and said that his will be done. He looked at the moon and said that they will free the world of Maple. Well, now let's get back to our hero who just single-handedly defeated an entire army of wild creatures. Dubois wasted no time and collected 27 mana stones that would be useful to them in the future. Elpham did not stand in one place for long. He said that they should move on. Dubois agreed with everything his new boss told him. They had already been traveling around the world for some time. Dubois thought about what he thought was an ordinary man. But he is an amazing man. It was telekinesis. He had never heard of such a use of fire arrow. If he travels with this guy, he will definitely earn a lot of money. Because he gets 30% of the income, this will cover the cost of treatment. Elpham turned to his assistant and said that they were here. They found a bunch more stumps. Dubois counted them and there were 9 of them. All these creatures now seemed to be sleeping. Elpham said that this was a suitable number, and his interlocutor asked what he was talking about. Elpham looked carefully at his interlocutor. Let him understand that now it is his turn to chop wood. First, Dubois threw a pebble to distract the attention of these creatures. I just got distracted by the stump and he immediately jumped on it to chop it into pieces. Having cut one, the other stumps also woke up and began to move towards the enemy. Dubois thought that his boss was some kind of crazy person. How could he alone defeat them? Especially with a weapon that he picked up for the first time. He wouldn't survive even with 9 lives like a cat. He has a terrible boss. Elpham looked at this whole battle and thought that Dubois would take a long time to master the halberd. But soon he will understand that this is the best type of weapon for him. You don't even need to think about how much potential he has. After all, he was the only one whom the heroine of the halberd accepted as students. Meanwhile, our hero's assistant was still fighting with those terrible creatures. And yet he succeeded. Even for a moment he thought that the halberd was not so bad. It hits at a distance and quite strongly. It is much more convenient with it than with a sword. It lies easier in the hands since there is no need to apply force. He tried new techniques and wondered what would happen if he swung even more smoothly than before. And he did it this way. He got better and better. He just chopped down all those creatures as if they were some kind of ordinary firewood. Elpum, watching the battle, thought that he quickly grasped the essence. And this even before the awakening of the circle. Right in the middle of the battle, Debo felt some kind of earthquake. He began to lose his balance. He looked up the mountain. He noticed that the birds flew into the air as if something had frightened them. Suddenly, from the rock next to which they were standing, some unknown thing cursed. And then the one who climbed out of that rock threw Debo aside. He didn't understand what the hell was going on here. What kind of creature was this? When he took a better look at this creature, he realized that there was a stump in front of him. This stump began to attack the one who came into this world without an invitation. The muscular guy did not have time to dodge. Elpum used his ring to throw him aside and save his life. And then he used his staff, saying that being big is not always good. You need to shoot a fire arrow. They say that if you are so big, you become an easy target. Debo, who still had not risen from the floor, thought that he was right. Fire magic should work. Well, suddenly something happened that they did not expect. The stump simply knocked off the arrow. Elpum thought that the creature's reflexes were better developed than it might seem when he decided to try again. He released the arrow and used telekinesis to change the trajectory of the arrow. And now everything should have worked out. The target almost reached the head of this creature. But the stump reacted again and deflected the arrow in mid-flight. Elpum was surprised that this creature stopped this blow. Debo shouted that even magic didn't work here. There's no need to wait, and you need to get away quickly. Elpum thought that it was not a matter of magic. Otherwise, he would not have been able to deflect the arrow. He is disturbed by the branches themselves, which react to the approach of the arrow. The stump tried to kill those two guys with one blow, with a powerful blow of its paw. Then the stump swung its branches in order to still destroy the guys who managed to evade. Elpum used his ring of levitation and grabbed the one on which he and his assistant landed. Then he lifted this stone into the air and began to fly on it. Having flown to the side, they managed to evade the attacks. Debo said that this was great. Then he coughed and thanked his boss for helping him because he thought that the end would come for him. Elpum turned to the assistant and told him to deal with the stumps that came here, and he himself would deal with stump. Debo didn't even have time to figure out what happened. He wanted to say something else to his boss, but he quickly moved away from him. Elpum rushed towards his opponent and used his staff to fire another arrow. Debo thought that this was useless. The monster could not be defeated without tactics. He needed to step back and come up with a plan. Stump again repelled the arrow's attack. Debo, who saw what was happening, thought that he was right after all. And then something happened that the stump did not expect. He was wounded after all. Debo, I was surprised to think that it actually worked. Elpum reloaded his staff and prepared for the next shot. At the same time, he thought that this stump was moving its branches faster than he thought. Even telekinesis will not help to strike, and again the enemy repelled the attack. But since our hero now has two circles, he can simultaneously use two abilities. He shot the creature with his arrows again, and finally managed to cut off its branch. Debo, who fought with stumps all the time, watched his boss fight. Elpum shot 2 arrows at a time. He hid one arrow behind the other. Although the monster is agile, he cannot stop 2 hits in a row. Just think, Sponge is overcome by only one person. Perhaps his base was stronger than he imagined. Debo was tense all the time. He was more interested in what was happening now with his boss. And he noticed something behind him. There were many stumps that were approaching him from behind. Debo shouted at his boss to be careful. There was danger behind him. He thought that he had missed a couple of stumps because there were too many for her. Elpum, without even turning around, using his arrow, destroyed all those enemies who approached him from behind. Elpum looked at his assistant, and with a disappointed face asked, "Is Debo really not able to cope even with ordinary monsters?" While our hero was distracted, the stump immediately, without wasting time, rushed straight at him to destroy him. Elpum jumped away from the enemy with quick movements of his legs. He thought that he did not have a moment of peace. The enemy kept advancing and advancing forward, and so did our hero. And finally there was an attack from the stump that our hero did not notice. And when he noticed, it was too late. But suddenly he was saved by Debo, who managed to notice the danger and cut off another branch of this monster with his weapon. The assistant told his boss that he saved his ass. Now they are even. Elpum smiled at his assistant and said that this is good. It means he has recouped his costs. Debo and Elpum unanimously said that it was time to end him. So the guys again continued their battle with this huge monster. The monster dodged and tried to deflect the arrows, but he did not always succeed. While ours was nodding and forging this creature, Debo was chopping up the huge monster in every possible way. In this way they managed to give this creature a good beating. Debo did not have time to react to the creature very quickly, and she began to attack him from both sides. Elpum turned to his assistant and shouted that he would take care of what was on the right. Such words were enough for the assistant to understand everything. Elpum cut the branch that was on the right, and his assistant cut the branch that was on the left. Debo jumped up and attacked his opponent in every possible way. He did it very quickly and epically. And it seems he got used to his new weapon because he wielded it like a professional. Well, he still didn't keep track of such an enemy, and the creature hit him with its branch right in the area of the kidneys. Debo screamed in pain and suffered internal hemorrhage. Because of this, he lost his balance and began to fall down. A huge creature already wanted to eat this guy. Elpham grabbed a boulder that was not far from him and made his assistant land on this boulder. But the huge creature broke the cobblestone with its paw and it began to fall down. Elpham was already starting to get angry. He used the power of levitation and thought about how annoying this monster is. He lifted many stones into the air along with Debo in order to guide his assistant to the goal. Debo realized what he needed to do and began to jump on these cobblestones as if on steps. While Elpham fired his fiery arrow and distracted the enemy's attention, Debo acted from the other side. Elpham shouted to his assistant and said that it was time to put an end to it. Debo just swung his new weapon and hit his opponent right in the eye. The creature screamed very loudly, because this was indeed exactly the place where he was truly hurt. The creature closed its eyes and the weapon got stuck in its eye. Debo could not resist and he let go of his weapon. He started to fall down and tried to fall on his head and he succeeded. This was not the end yet. It was necessary to finish off this creature while it still couldn't see well. Elpham used the ring and began to pull his assistant's weapon out of the enemy's eye. With a sharp movement of his hand, he sent the weapon straight to its owner. Debo grabbed and epically addressed his opponent. He said that Dear One will now receive his dessert. Very quickly he approached the next eye of the enemy, and again dealt him a crushing and hard blow. The stump screamed loudly and began to turn quickly. Debo began to fall down again. Once again he landed on his feet like a cat with his weapon. The monster wanted to survive and destroy his opponents, so he quickly rushed towards Debo. But the assistant did not have time to react, and Elpham again fired 2 arrows in a row. These arrows hit directly the core that was in the head of this monster. Finally they reached their goal. The stump screamed loudly and they saw its core. Then it caught fire with a bright flame. The wood burns very well. Poisoned and exhausted, Debo was breathing heavily. His boss came up to him and said that he was great. Elpham watched their opponent burn, and his assistant said that the boss was also great. The huge creature fell to the ground, the fire burning incredibly high. Now let's move to another place. In one of the houses the light was still burning through the window in the late evening. It was already very late. The girl was sitting there alone at the table, thinking that she needed to quickly eat and go to bed. Before eating, according to her old tradition, she began to pray to God. And as soon as she said the words of prayer, she immediately felt that someone was knocking on the door. When she went out to see who came there at such a late time, she was very surprised. As it turned out, it was her brother. He was all exhausted, dirty and covered in blood, but alive. As soon as the girl saw her brother who had returned, she grabbed her skirt and squeezed it tightly, trying to hold back her tears. But nothing worked for her. Tears simply flowed like a river from her eyes. Then she rushed to her brother and hugged him tightly. She was very happy to see him. And now let's return to our hero. He also went to the same house. Arriving there and opening the door, he noticed the man's body lying on the bed. He looked sadly at the one who was already lifeless, and he stood there for several minutes. It looks like it was his father who was left alone and died. Death overtook this man not so long ago. He was already decomposing. After some time of silent distance, Elpham decided what he would do next. His after caught fire. He is clearly going to use it now. And he used it to burn this house along with the body of that man. He heard his house burning down, and he was incredibly sad and hurt at that moment. But nothing could be returned. He needed to burn all the bridges and move on. Now let's see what's happening in our new friend's office. And now he's faced with a problem. It's time to send people to the gate for 100 people. But who should he choose? Larkana is responsible for this campaign. Therefore, he must choose the best of the best. This campaign is very important, and will attract the attention of everyone from the top 10. There should be epic rank and higher rank items at the human gate. Perhaps even legendary tier items will appear. He thought that if he admitted to himself honestly, it would be very difficult. Natasha's 3 sisters are from the Goldrich Guild. They are so strong that it is difficult to believe in their rank of the second circle of power. In comparison with them, the adventurers of the second circle from Gapur are even ashamed to be called adventurers. But even without them, the seekers from the 10 guilds pose a threat. After all, their guild is the weakest of the 10 largest. He looked at the photo of our hero and thought that he didn't want to admit it. Suddenly someone opened the door without knocking and burst into this man's office. He asked who it was. When he saw who was standing in front of him, he immediately stood up. It was the same Larkana who actually comes here very rarely. This person immediately asked what is happening with the composition of the group now. He sat down in the place where the man with the bandage was sitting. Her subordinates said that he was asking for forgiveness, but he was not ready yet. Larkin said that he usually doesn't take too long with something like this, and also asked how their friend was doing. The man with the eye patch said that he still has reasons to worry. Last time the Chav group was destroyed, and since there were no witnesses, it is not possible to establish what exactly happened there. He is certainly talented, but that is not the problem, Larkana asked. Maybe then check him again? You need to find out whether he is crazy or not, and also let his subordinates gather all the candidates. You need to push them a little. Larkana smiled like a demon and said that this time there will be a lot of witnesses. After some time, our hero and his assistant went to the next portal. Debo said that this time there were a lot of people, and so they paid attention to our hero and asked, "Are they really the 15? Those guys looked at them like they were some kind of scum, saying that they were 2 former slaves. Elpham immediately realized that they were not welcome here. The more experienced the team, the more their confidence grew that the slaves were just a nuisance. They seem to have 1 or 2 circles. They are different from Chef's team. With such abilities they have no need for bait." The head personally came to them and shouted for everyone to gather. He said that he would not rant, and now they will conduct a test. Those who demonstrate their abilities will receive a special chance. A man with black hair and a red headband asked, "What kind of chance do you mean?" The man said that this would be a chance to enter the gate for 100 people. Then the guys were surprised that they got such a chance. He also said that this would be a special opportunity for them. Elpham thought, "Is this man really going to turn this around?" After these words, he immediately told them all to enter the portal and begin. This is exactly what the guys did, and they immediately noticed what was in the forest. The man in red pants turned to the woman in the big hat and said that it would be enough to just kill the boss together. Then they should separate and meet when they received the signal. Elpham and his assistant stood silently and watched what was happening here. All participants immediately set off on the road. The leaders say that time is short and time needs to be spent productively. The woman in the hat looked somewhere behind a tree and saw that there was one monster there. She thought that they were just wasting time and immediately got ready to destroy that little monster. She used her staff and destroyed that creature with an energy discharge. She thought it was very boring. She needed to pick up the magic stone and move on. Well, as it turned out, she was completely wrong. She did not destroy the creature, and it was alive. She was very surprised and asked, "Did magical attacks not work on him?" She wanted to tell her assistant that they should destroy this creature manually. She blew a strong wind. Other creatures sensed the scent of these people and began to crawl out from everywhere. And of course the time came for battle. They fought to save their lives. After some time, they managed to destroy and cut down those creatures manually using blades and arrows. One of those guys said that the monsters are stronger than they expected. What will they do now? The woman in the hat, whose name was Dolan, said that in any case there are too many of these creatures for them. If this continues, their strength will dry out. She also said that the risk is of course very high. We need to break the alliance and kill the boss ourselves. Meanwhile, Elpham was telling this to his assistant. He said that this is exactly what most of the teams would think. Debo said that this would definitely be the case, and not too proud. And he also said whether the boss was going to help him with these creatures. He was just talking. Elpham answered him that there were only 3 of them here, and he himself was doing a good job. Debo replied that, no matter how it was, they didn't have time to sit out their pants. They needed to move on. Elpham said that it was necessary to destroy all the mobs. Debo said that they would start a boss hunt. They said this at the same time. Debo did not understand what they were talking about. He asked his boss what he saw. He had just spoken about that monster boss. Elpham answered him that others would think so, and they would engage in mass destruction of mobs. Killing the boss is not the only indicator of ability. Hunting small monsters also takes into account. In addition, it can be dangerous to compete with a large number of groups determined to attack the boss. It is difficult to imagine the lengths they will go to restrain each other. Debo agreed and said that this was true. It might be difficult to break through, but he himself thought that the boss was annoying him. But he was right. In addition, our hero felt that great danger emanated from these gates. Meanwhile, another group of guys went to meet the main monster, Dolan. It was the one in the Harry Potter hat who was walking ahead. Her assistant turned to her and told her to look there. It was an escape gate. She didn't want to look for it. But if they found it, that's good. It's better to leave a mark on the road. Suddenly, one member of her team began to laugh loudly. Dolan looked at him and asked what was happening to him, if he should be quieter. But for some reason he laughed without impact, like a madman from a mental hospital. The head approached him and grabbed him by the shoulder. She wanted to calm him down so that he would not attract monsters. But when she looked at him, she saw that his face was all sweaty. He was in tears and he was acting very crazy. And then she noticed that others began to laugh loudly, as if they had gone mad at one moment. Only now did she realize that it was poison, and she realized that she could get out of here alone. While running away, she heard someone scream behind her. It was a huge and terrible monster in the form of a mushroom that emitted poison. There were many holes on the body of that monster. These were the pores from which that poison came. Dolan looked at that monster. She couldn't hold her breath for long and inhaled that poison. Then she also started laughing madly. She stopped. She was already poisoned and her brain did not listen to her. Now she was captured by that monster. Elpham and Debo continued their journey. They were focused on what they were doing. Now they were walking near the Grand Canyon. Debo thought, is this bum not going to fight today? Suddenly our guys saw a signal in the sky. It was a signal to assemble. The guys immediately went to where the signal came from. Debo was surprised that they notified everyone when they found the main monster. Elpham looked closely and noticed that something was wrong here. There was not just one team. All the teams were here except one. The man in the red headband said that it looks like everything is here. Then he begins to explain. One of the women said that the magician Dolan's team is still not there. Then the man said that there was no point in waiting for them. They still found the boss of this area. And that monster, by the way, killed Dolan along with her assistants. This boss is called the Toadstool, an extremely dangerous and ferocious creature. The girl who heard what he just said was scared, not understanding. Is he really telling the truth now? People began to fuss for food. They said that their team did not have enough strength for such a battle. If everything is really like that, then it is useless to try to clear the gate. We need to look for a way out as soon as possible, Debo asked his boss. Is this clown mushroom really that dangerous? Our hero was thinking that it was now clear who it was, since the current level of meeting with the toadstool is more dangerous for them. Because of the poisons and the spores that monsters release around themselves, close combat makes no sense. You can't take him in a tick either. You can kill him only in ranged combat. While Elpham was thinking, his assistant tried in every possible way to attract his attention and find out what everything was. What kind of monster is this? A man with a red bandage on his head said that unfortunately this toadstool is standing right in front of the exit gate. The only way to get to it is through it. Debo said that this was not a problem. Just one fire arrow from Elpham and everything would be over. But Elpham told his assistant to shut up. Debo was very angry when they closed his mouth. Elpham said that without a good strategy they would all die. But the fire arrow can't even scratch him. Our hero's assistant was very surprised and asked why. Even ordinary monsters here have tough skins, so the main beast of this area is not even worth thinking about. A man with a bandage on his head whose name was Ibra said that this was nonsense. And it was immediately clear that this was what the slaves were saying. So his assistant turned to him and said that now is the time for me to do this. They need a solution. Elpham raised his hand and said that he needed 50,000 masses from each. Ibra looked at our hero in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. Our hero said that there are only 30 people here. So in total they need to pay 1.5 million. And then they will act as bait so that the others can move on. Everyone fell silent. They were deceived by this decision and did not understand why this person was saying such things. Debo began to panic. He thought that the boss had gone completely crazy. Did he really want to kill them? Ibra shouted that our hero should not interfere. It seems that his slave mentality has not yet completely disappeared. And let him not think that everything will be as he wants. In this situation the bait will not save them. If the useless bait dies immediately, then it will all be over for them. In the high-level gates the slaves are only in the way. Then he said, who the hell are they to say such ideas? He pointed his finger at Debo and said that this idiot hasn't even woken up yet. What can a second circle man and a slave do? Debo was starting to get very angry. She was thinking that he didn't even have the thought of stopping the bait. Why does he keep running into trouble? Elpham, as always, in a calm voice, asked what Ibra was offering then. But his interlocutor simply remained silent. He didn't have any idea. Elpham said that means he didn't have one. Otherwise why would he collect it here? Elpham said that he missed something else. Their team has one person with the second circle, and one with the first circle. Then Debo looked at his hand and noticed that he really had the first circle. I didn't even notice the moment when this circle appeared. Now it has talent. Our hero also continued talking and said that we were his interlocutors. After all, only a couple of people with a second circle. The girl who listened to all this and asked our hero to wait. She was ready to pay money if he became bait, although she now does not have hundreds of thousands for the two of them. Elpham said that in this case she will already pay when they leave here. If they cannot escape, then in this case they will simply sacrifice themselves. But his condition is the consent of absolutely everyone. Now there was a tense situation. They needed to decide what they would do next. Still, they decided something. Near the gate from where they could finally get out there was that same terrible creature that ate those poor fellows that they managed to catch. But someone interrupted his meal. The creature felt someone's gaze on him. Having looked around, this creature saw that it was coming straight towards him, which our hero had released. This fire arrow hit this creature right in the face. The huge mushroom was surprised. His assistant tied the mouths of the Alps with bandages. Our hero told Debo to run only if the mushroom discovered them. Debo didn't understand why he was being punished for all this, but he couldn't refuse. As soon as the mushroom looked around and noticed where those violators of his peace were, he immediately rushed at them. Debo and our hero began to quickly run away. Debo did not understand why this mushroom was so fast. But he really was incredibly fast. He moved like a damn demon. The girl, along with the other team, said that now they must activate the gate before the bait is killed. And now the guys approached the gate and quickly clicked on it to activate it. The gate opened and the guys began to quickly run away trying to save their lives. And they succeeded. A huge creature pursued our heroes who quickly ran away from it. The mushroom roared and right in front of the guys many other creatures appeared that were less dangerous. But there were too many of them. Debo was very angry that something had happened. But he was not going to give up so easily. He swung his weapon and fought with those creatures to clear the way. And this time, he even unexpectedly activated a cutting explosion. Well, the ferocious creature in the shape of a mushroom was already overtaking him. Another moment, and he was dead. But fortunately, Elpham used a fiery arrow and knocked that creature down. On the teeth of this creature there was still fresh blood of the victims he had already devoured. Elpham used a fire arrow again as soon as he saw that mushroom rise to his head. This time, this mushroom realized its mistake and dodged the attack. Elpham immediately used his ring and turned the arrow in a different direction. But that mushroom was very fast. He dodged the attack in every possible way and screamed loudly. Elpham uses an arrow to hit him on the mushroom, constantly dodging and approaching the guys. Debo shouted that he was approaching, then they ran to the edge of the cliff and jumped off from there. The mushroom tried to catch them but did not have time to do so this time. While they were falling, Debo began to tease this monster and showed him the middle finger. Elpham, meanwhile, used his fire arrow to attack the enemy and hit him. Then they fell straight into the water. It was a fast-moving river that moved very quickly.